They were eagerly anticipating this trip. It was their dream. They assured their relatives that Panama was a safe and civilized country, and the local jungles were nothing more than a large botanical garden. How wrong they were, and what a tragic turn of events it would become. Chris Kremers, 21 years old, and Lisanne Froon, 22 years old, were two students from the small Dutch town of Amersfoort. Chris Kremers was outgoing and sociable, studying art history. Lisanne was studying psychology and, standing at 184 centimeters tall, played for the university volleyball team. Both girls were studying Spanish and dreamed of visiting Latin America. They eventually chose Panama. They had planned a 6-week trip. For the first 2 weeks, they were to enjoy a beach vacation in the resort province of Bocas del Toro, and for the remaining 4 weeks, they were to travel to a small town in the interior of the country called Boquete, where there was a Spanish-language school tailored for European tourists. Learning Spanish in this school was done through practical immersion, meaning the girls were supposed to engage in various social activities with local schoolchildren while improving their conversational foreign language skills. Chris paid for her trip to Panama from her own savings, saving up for 6 months while working part-time. For Lisanne, the trip was partly a gift from her parents, a sort of advance payment for her future diploma. In mid-March 2014, the friends arrived at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. Their parents, who saw them off, took farewell photographs. Chris and Lisanne went through customs and disappeared behind the waiting area doors. Their parents would never see them again. Bocas del Toro on the Caribbean coast warmly welcomed the two students. They swam in the sea, sunbathed, frequented local cafes in the evenings, and took many photographs to capture memories of one of the happiest periods in their lives. Finally, their dream had come true. But the end of the month was approaching. It's worth noting that in April, the girls were to begin their language practice in another city in Panama. On March 29th, Chris and Lisanne found themselves in Boquete. Despite the fact that Boquete is located far from the sea, it attracts many tourists. The main attraction is the volcanic mountain called Baru, which is 3,473 meters high. Baru is surrounded by beautiful jungles, which are also loved by tourists from different countries. Hence, there were hiking trails in the tropical forests, places to rest, and even small roadside cafes for the convenience of tired travelers. However, this doesn't mean that the local jungles are entirely safe. Venturing off the established paths is prohibited. Starting the discussion of the criminal aspect of this story, it should be mentioned that the events of March 31st and April 1st couldn't be fully reconstructed due to discrepancies in witness testimonies about certain facts, which will become known later. Chris and Lisanne, upon arriving at their destination, immediately went to the accommodation they had arranged in advance. It was a room in an annex of a house owned by a woman named Miriam. She rents it under a contract with the Spanish language school. The room had a separate entrance. The girls received 2 sets of keys, met the landlady, and got familiar with their new place to stay before going to sleep. On March 30th, after having breakfast, the friends went to explore the town and returned in the evening. On March 31st, early in the morning, the girls went to their language school and were informed that the practice would start a week later than planned, on April 8th. This meant that Lisanne and Chris had a whole week of free time, and they decided to explore the local natural attractions. At the school, they met a guide named Feliciano Gonzalez and arranged for him to accompany them on 2 hiking routes. On April 2nd, they would visit a so-called strawberry farm located at the base of the Baru volcano, and on April 5th, they planned to hike the volcano itself. On the evening of the same day, the girls had their last contact with their parents via WhatsApp. "We're fine, we'll talk later." This was Lisanne's last message. April 1st deserves a more detailed description. Early in the morning, the girls made numerous internet searches about hiking routes in their area. They were particularly interested in the El Pianista route, which is located in the jungles near the Baru volcano. The El Pianista route leads to a viewpoint, and then the trail continues further, crossing from the eastern slope of the volcano to the west. The route has changes in altitude and offers picturesque views, including mountains, a river, canyons, tropical forests, exotic flora, and fauna. To reach the viewpoint, you need to walk continuously for about 2 hours. The descent from the hill should take about the same amount of time. Hence, 1 daylight period should be sufficient. But this is only in theory. It appears the girls decided to hike the planned route independently. It wasn't considered dangerous, and it didn't formally require special preparation or equipment. In the morning, around 9 to 11, the girls were seen by the guide Feliciano Gonzalez at a cafe near their school, in the company of 2 young men, most likely also students from the Spanish language school. They later entered the cafe. Around 1 p.m., according to the guide's testimony, the girls left the school. At 1:30, a taxi driver named Leonardo Mastino saw the girls hitchhiking on the road near the school. He gave them a ride to the starting point of the El Pianista hiking trail for $5. At 3 p.m., Giovanni, the owner of a cafe located at the beginning of El Pianista, talked to the girls. They asked him several questions about the route. A little later, around 3 p.m., one of the cafe's employees saw the girls heading out on the trail and gave them his Siberian husky named Blue as a guide. According to the cafe owner's wife Doris, an hour later, the dog returned alone. Around 5 p.m., the exact time was not specified, Pedro Capone, a local resident, saw 2 girls returning from the trail. They asked him for directions on how to get back to the city. Pedro simply pointed them in the right direction and went about his business, so he didn't notice where the girls went. After that, no one saw the girls. As we remember, on April 2nd, Chris and Lisanne were supposed to have a guided tour with Feliciano Gonzalez, but the clients did not show up for the scheduled meeting. Feliciano learned from the school where they were staying and, upon finding out from the landlady that the foreign girls hadn't spent the night in their room, immediately contacted the police. Panama is considered relatively safe for tourists, but there have been cases of European tourists going missing. On the morning of April 3rd, the Panamanian police began search operations. Searches were conducted at the school and in the room where Lisanne and Chris were staying. 2 laptops belonging to the students were found there, but nothing interesting was discovered on them. The police systematically combed through several of the nearby routes over the next few days, including the infamous El Pianista Trail. On April 5th, the first helicopter took to the air, not so much for search purposes, but for coordinating rescue teams. On April 6th, the search for the missing girls extended to the neighboring country of Costa Rica. The search was in full swing. On April 8th, helicopter searches began. On April 10th, the parents arrived in Panama. The active phase of the operation ended on April 14th. All search efforts yielded no results. Nothing was found. The dense jungles and the black mountain above them held their secret. There were no tree markings, no abandoned items or signs, no trash or notes indicating the girls' journey. On April 30th, a reward of $30,000 was offered for information about the whereabouts of Chris and Lisanne. The amount was later increased to $40,000. By Panamanian standards, this was considered a substantial sum, so the police hoped that someone would share valuable information with them. However, everything was in vain. In late May, a specialized Dutch police team with working dogs came to assist their Panamanian colleagues. 18 officers focused on the places where Lisanne and Chris were last seen and interviewed witnesses who were willing to cooperate with the investigation. 12 service dogs assisted in the effort, but again, all efforts were in vain. The Dutch rescuers in the Panamanian jungles discovered the following. On the very first day, their dogs were stung by wasps. The dogs were saved thanks to a makeshift local antidote. Then, it rained on the Dutch team, and they realized that the rocks became extremely slippery, requiring cautious movement. Furthermore, the difficulty of the terrain can be judged by the fact that Botsady Pitti, a prosecutor from the Panamanian investigation, was hospitalized due to severe dehydration after the search operation. After the unsuccessful conclusion of their mission, the police stated that it was possible that the girls had encountered an accident. The subtropical forest turned out to be much more dangerous than the colorful pictures in the promotional brochure. The primary working theory of the investigation was that Chris and Lisanne had become lost after deviating from the trail. This was quite possible, considering that the girls were inexperienced and unprepared. 2 weeks later, desperate parents gave their consent to completely halt search operations. A new development in the mysterious disappearance case of Kremers and Lisanne Froon occurred on June 11, 2014. A local indigenous person, working in a rice field, discovered a blue backpack in the dried-up bed of the nearby Colibri River. The contents of the backpack included medical insurance cards with the names Kremers and Lisanne Froon, $83, 2 pairs of sunglasses, 2 mobile phones, an iPhone and a Samsung, 2 bras, likely packed by the girls for changing if they planned to swim in a waterfall or mountain stream, a water bottle, and a Canon camera. It's likely that the backpack was brought to this location by a water current. The backpack was more than 10 kilometers away from the El Pianista tourist trail. No search operations had been conducted in this area. The search operation immediately began along the riverbed. Panamanian search teams followed the river upstream, hoping it would lead them to the missing girls. Unfortunately, they didn't find the missing girls, but they did find a place that appeared to be a temporary shelter for the girls. 2 plastic bags tied between branches suggested that Chris and Lisanne had collected rainwater. In the same area, near the confluence of 2 rivers, Chris's denim shorts were found. They were lying on a raised area. No significant damage or bloodstains were found on them, according to forensic examination. The police speculated that the girls might have placed them there for drying. The discoveries didn't stop there. A black shoe, which belonged to Lisanne, was found nearby, behind a tree. Lisanne's genetic material was found inside the shoe. A fragment of Chris's bone was also found. Forensic anthropology determined that the fragments had been damaged by a large predator. Subsequently, multiple body parts of the girls were found not far from this location and close to the river. The skin material showed the first stage of decomposition, leading the police to conclude that it had been kept in the shade in a cool place. The skin exhibited black spots and numerous insect bites. In early August, more than 15 kilometers in a straight line from the start of El Pianista, new remains were discovered. Most of them belonged to animals, but one fragment was identified as Chris Kremers. Based on these gruesome findings, it became clear that the girls were no longer alive. The Panamanian police voiced the theory that the girls might have fallen victim to predators. The primary suspect looked like this. DNA traces of unknown individuals were found on the backpack and phones, but this ultimately didn't lead to anything. In the complex situation that had developed, it was evident that the backpack could have been handled by strangers at the airport or accidentally on public transport, and the phones might have been used by people whom the girls had asked to take their picture or leave their number. There were many new acquaintances. By the way, the indigenous person didn't immediately report his discovery, so anyone from his acquaintances could have handled and examined the items. As we recall, besides the phones, a camera was found in the backpack. All the equipment had been damaged by prolonged exposure to water, but the data was successfully recovered. However, not all the photos were published. So, let's go back to April 1st. The time when the photos were taken contradicts all the witness testimonies. According to the photo evidence, the girls began their journey on El Pianista not after 2 p.m., but much earlier, around 10:45 a.m. Why there were discrepancies in the timing could not be definitively determined. Many speculated that the time on the camera might have been set differently, as is often the case. Only one photo was taken with the phone, but the time it was created is unknown. The fact that the girls embarked on the route relatively late can be explained by the fact that they could have turned back at any time. The sun sets around 6:30 p.m. The testimonies that claimed to have seen the girls returning were not very reliable. The exact time was not provided, and the witness might have confused them with other tourists. By the way, in the Panamanian documentary, it stated that the sightings of the girls at 5 p.m. were related to March 31st. This cannot be ruled out. Let's return to the photos. The first of the published photos was taken with the camera at 12:03, somewhere halfway to the highest point. In the photo, Chris is holding a plastic bottle, which would later be found in the backpack. The next published photo was taken at 12:22. By this time, the girls had been on El Pianista for about 2 hours. The photo shows a canyon. Its place in the overall timeline has sparked heated debates among researchers of this case. The issue is that there are no canyons on the way to the volcano, they are on the descent from the other side. It's possible that the girls had strayed from the route. Moreover, it's noticeable that the photo is blurry and was probably taken while walking. The travelers are not panicking yet, as they continue to take pictures of the natural beauty, but they already seem concerned, as they are not posing with carefree smiles. The next photo was taken at 1:01 p.m. Lisanne is on a lookout point. 6 seconds after the previous photo, Lisanne took a photo overlooking the opposite side. Lisanne took a photo of Chris on her mobile phone at an unknown time. Then the girls took several more photos on the lookout point. At 1:20 p.m., Chris descends. The girls are going through the most challenging part of this route. At 1:54 p.m., they are captured crossing a stream. 8 seconds after the previous photo, Chris is photographed on the other side of the stream. The police have confirmed that this is the last photo dated on the first day. Furthermore, it's the last coherent photo on the device. What the girls did over the next 2 hours is unknown. At 4:39 p.m., Chris attempted to contact emergency services for the first time by dialing 112 on her iPhone. This is the emergency number for the Netherlands and many other European countries. After 12 minutes, Lisanne followed suit, also dialing 112 on her Samsung. In Panama, the emergency number is 911, but the fact that the girls tried to call the more familiar number 112 was not a mistake, as cell phone operators automatically redirect to the emergency services number of the country where the phone's owner is at that moment. The real problem was that there was no signal at the location from which they were calling. They didn't make any more attempts to call after April 1st. On April 2nd, at 6:58 a.m., Lisanne made the first attempt to call emergency services. At 8:14 a.m., Chris also made an unsuccessful attempt, and she didn't use her phone for the rest of the day. Lisanne tried to call again at 10:53 a.m. and 1:56 p.m., this time dialing both 112 and 911. On April 3rd, at 9:33 a.m., Chris tried to contact 911 once more, but the network coverage was insufficient for a connection, and this was the last call to 911. Throughout the day, the girls turned on their phones a couple of times, but they didn't make any calls or send text messages. On April 4th, Chris turned on her mobile twice, at 10:16 a.m. and 1:42 p.m. There was no activity on Lisanne's phone on this day. On April 5th, Lisanne's mobile turned on at night at 4:50 a.m. and remained on for 10 minutes, completely draining the battery and turning off. Chris's phone turned on twice, at 10:50 a.m. and 1:37 p.m. On April 6th, at 10:26 a.m., Chris's iPhone turned on again, but this time it wasn't unlocked with a PIN code. It turned on again at 1:37 p.m. From April 7th to April 10th, Chris's phone turned on a total of 77 times. During the night of April 8th, someone unexpectedly turned on the camera and took 90 photos over 3 hours, averaging 1 photo every 2 minutes. Almost all of these photos were taken in complete darkness without a flash. As stated by the Dutch police, it's impossible to discern or recognize anything in these photos. Out of the 3 photos taken with a flash, only 2 were initially published. The first photo was taken at 1:38 a.m. The next photo was taken at 1:39 a.m. Almost 6 months after the funeral, Chris Kremers' parents decided to show the third, so to speak, resulting photo. It was taken at 3:54 a.m. Even later, a big sensation was the appearance of the fourth photo, which showed a backpack strap, toilet paper, a mirror, or a lid. On April 11th, Chris's phone turned on first at 10:51 a.m., again without a PIN code, and then at 11:56 a.m., turning off approximately an hour later. In February 2015, the Dutch police published a report on their investigation. According to the Dutch police, Lisanne Froon and Chris Kremers died as a result of an accident. Many immediately criticized the report. supporters of the criminal version emerged, convinced that the girls had been killed. We think that this is unlikely. Now let's try to speculate on what might have happened. We'll start again with April 1st. The girls reached the lookout point without incident and in high spirits. In official guides to the surroundings of Boquete, this place is considered the end of the trail, and many tourists turn back, but the trail actually continues. The most challenging part falls on the descent on the opposite side of the volcano. Judging from the photos, Lisanne and Chris continued their journey and started descending. They were acting voluntarily, as seen in the photos. Perhaps, for the sake of beautiful pictures of untouched jungles, the girls ventured off the trail. They wandered for an hour or even longer, thinking they could find their way out on their own. Moving on such stones is quite challenging. As noted by the Dutch police, these stones are wet and slippery. Lisanne had a leg injury, which was discovered, and it corresponds to a fall from a height. They were descending, and presumably, Lisanne approached the edge, slipped, and got injured. Lisanne might have been able to move, but slowly. Getting out of the jumble by themselves was not feasible, and they had no idea where to go. They were lost. It started to get dark. They tried to call for help. As we know, they failed due to the lack of a signal. They decided to stop somewhere for the night. The girls found the nearest open spot by the river. They didn't give up. They didn't make continuous calls to avoid draining the battery. They chose to wait through the night, hoping that someone would find them. On the following day, they tried to call again, but it was unsuccessful once more. The infrequent calls to emergency services suggest that they likely stayed in one place or moved only a short distance along the river. Unfortunately, the search operations were taking place in a completely different direction. On the morning of April 3rd, there was only one attempt to call. During the day, they turned on their phones a couple of times, but didn't attempt to call upon seeing no signal. In the evening, there was a prolonged rainfall. The girls hung their plastic bags to collect rainwater. This spot with the bags on the branches was discovered by search teams. Only on April 4th, early in the morning, did the rain stop. On this day, the girls didn't move or look for another place to contact rescuers. Chris's wet shorts, which she laid out to dry, also suggest that the friends continued to wait. Lisanne had a leg injury. Taking off and drying her clothes wasn't easy. Most likely, they attempted to move on the first day or two, but in the subsequent days, they stayed in one place. Perhaps they didn't have the strength to move. Also, on April 4th, they turned on their phones twice in the morning and afternoon without attempting to make a call. Seeing the futility of trying to call, they didn't want to waste their phone battery. On April 5th, again, their actions suggest that the situation hadn't changed. Lisanne's phone completely ran out of battery. On the same day, the first helicopter took to the air. The girls might have heard it in the distance, which is indicated by their makeshift signals. For example, a branch with red-tied bags and toilet paper spread on a rock. Jeremy Cridd, a journalist and a real expert in this matter, believed that the girls used the toilet paper to create an SOS signal. They didn't have matches, so starting a fire was impossible. They didn't know how else to attract attention. Unfortunately, the helicopter never flew over them. On April 6th, Chris's phone turned on, but for the first time without entering the PIN code. Perhaps Lisanne did it, or maybe the girls were simply checking for a signal. Then the PIN was entered. It's unlikely that someone else turned on the phone. On April 7th, more active actions were taken. The phone was turned on much more frequently. The situation was bordering on panic. Chris and Lisanne didn't have any first aid supplies, fresh water, or food with them. They lacked proper sun protection and basic antiseptics. Heat stroke, dehydration, insect or snake bites, allergic reactions, poisoning from some fruit or water, and possibly a combination of these factors began to affect them. Chris was the first to start giving in, begging her friend for help. Lisanne, being an athlete and a volleyball player, despite her injury, proved to be more resilient. Barely able to move short distances, Lisanne started leaving their makeshift camp in search of a signal. Here, let's move forward and examine this nighttime photo. It clearly shows a packet. Such packaging for cough drops from the Vicks company was found in the girl's room. Most likely, one of them, perhaps Chris, had a cold as well. Also, notice the red bags, the same as in their room. This proves that it was Chris and Lisanne at this location. On the night of April 7th to April 8th, Chris fell unconscious, slowly dying. Lisanne tried to help. In such a situation, the first thing needed is light, and Lisanne could have used their only light source, the camera screen, excluding the iPhone, which remained their only potential means of communication. On April 8th, it was cloudy and consequently very dark. The flash was useless in these conditions, it only blinds the eyes accustomed to the darkness. This explains the photos taken at around 2 a.m., which were taken one after the other, and then the flash was turned off. This also explains the subsequent dark photos, of which there were many. The photos were taken at consistent intervals, which is logical. When the screen goes dark, Lisanne pressed the shutter button to illuminate it again. Sometime later, the light would go out, and the process repeated. It wasn't her camera. She acted in a critical situation in the most obvious way. Chris had a Canon EOS Rebel XS camera. Its flash can be turned off with an intuitive and easy movement. The screen remains lit for a sufficiently long time, about a minute. So, when the screen went dark, they pressed the shutter button, which is familiar to everyone, and the screen was active again. It didn't respond to other buttons. This is why there are so many black photos in complete darkness. Lisanne only needed illumination. During this illumination, she moved around, taking active actions in an attempt to revive Chris. The last photo, showing Chris's red hair, was taken later. Perhaps it was a posthumous photo of Chris taken by Lisanne for herself. The subsequent dark photos are explained by Lisanne starting to gather her things, unable to stay with her friend. The dark photos ended when dawn broke. This is hardly a coincidence. With the sunrise, Lisanne left the camp in search of a signal, constantly turning her phone on and off. Lisanne didn't give up and tried to survive until the end. She couldn't have gone far. On April 11th, when the iPhone finally ran out of battery, she was still alive. She packed all the electronics in her backpack and continued her journey. However, she didn't have the strength to make it out, and she also perished. Insects, birds, and large predators began to gather around the girl's remains. The backpack was carried away by the water during the rainy period in May 2014. Their remains could also have been carried away by the water over a considerable distance. The force of the current can be determined from this photo. Water can move even large boulders. Of course, these are just assumptions. This is an attempt to explain what happened without involving foul play. Criminals wouldn't have bothered laying out Chris's shorts on a rock or spent time hanging up bags. Why would killers engage in these installations? The jungle already easily allows them to conceal victims and all evidence quickly. Criminals wouldn't have left behind cash and electronic devices belonging to the victims. From April 2nd to April 11th, Lisanne and Chris were completely alone. The story is horrifying, and their deaths were agonizing and prolonged. The most terrifying thing is to realize that help is close, that they were being searched for, but time is passing. Panic and sheer terror set in. The strength, fueled by hope, fades away, and it feels like you're all alone in the world with your misfortune.